when we talked before, the programs that we're trying to do here at Google, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of similarity. And yet one of the challenges we face, especially in places like LA, as you mentioned, we do have an LA office, the Bay Area, is they don't want to drive necessarily, but then there's not a good alternative for them, right? So one of the challenges we face is advocating for improvements to those, the transportation infrastructure. What are some of your thoughts about how to do that?
It comes down to engaging with lawmakers, but lawmakers have a tough go because they have to answer to a bunch of different parties. And one of the biggest elements that lawmakers are responsible for is maintaining the economics of a town. So businesses play a big role. And sometimes what we've found is that businesses are concerned that by having a bike lane in front of their storefront, they might lose foot traffic or they might lose traffic in general. And so what we are trying to do right now is we are meeting with app developers and trying to find the right partnership to create an app that would not just act kind of like a map that gives you the real-time movement of public transit in the area, but it would also be a social space where people could discuss what bike lanes look like at various points of the day. They can say, hey, this intersection is terrible between noon and 2 o'clock. Be careful there. They can rate places kind of like Waze does. And we can also talk about subway stops so that we can make the infrastructure we can make it safer. And in addition to that, what we're looking to do is by getting the data and comparing it, let's say, to the improved economics, because we have statistics, but they're scattered throughout the US, by saying, hey, businesses in Los Angeles, businesses in San Francisco, when you have a bike lane in front of your storefront, you end up increasing revenue by 179%, which we saw in a Texas city, right? So if we're able to give them statistical proof and we're able to arm government officials, then they're going to be able to go to businesses and go to their constituency and justify some of the improved infrastructure. And so that's where we're at right now.
That's great. So yeah, you're talking about people have barriers to using alternate modes, right? And
yes.
So sometimes it actually is the infrastructure. The bike lanes is a great example, and we experienced that, I know, in the Bay Area and probably in a lot of our other offices as well, where they'll build this beautiful bike lane and it goes right to city limits, right?
Yeah.
And then there's no cross-jurisdictional coordination.
Yeah.
Do you see there being a role, and the use of technology is one good example? Are there other roles where we can advocate for that kind of cross-jurisdictional or regional mindset to improve transportation on a wider basis, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna come down to arming lawmakers with what they need in order to build the infrastructure. It comes down to us advocating for it. It's simple economics, supply and demand. So if we demand it, and if we're using the infrastructure more, then the government and the institutions that are responsible for building projects like that, they have no choice but to supply it.
Yeah. That's great. So that's on the technology and kind of infrastructure side. A lot of your presentation, which I think is fantastic, is more about encouraging people's behavior change, right?
Right.
So it's one thing to have the infrastructure, but it's another thing to just kind of get over that hump. One thing that we talked about before we like to illustrate is there's, for bicycling, for instance, there's people that already bike to work, and that's great, and we want you to keep doing that. And then there's people that are never going to bike no matter what, and we'll just leave you alone, right? But there's that middle group of, I might be willing to bike, but there's something about it that I'm not sure about.
Huge group. It's like 60% of cyclists, for instance.
Exactly. So what are some strategies that you think or you've seen are most important for us to kind of consider as we influence that group to change their behavior?
Well, we know that safety is an important one. So you're looking at the first and last mile. And again, it has to do with building infrastructure and making the roadways safe. And it's not just about educating cyclists, it's also about educating car drivers. So Long Beach is doing a great job of building a lot of bicycle infrastructure. And one of the things that they've done is they've slowly educated the car community about the new bike infrastructure. And they build these really bold green lanes so that there's no way you can miss it. So before bikes are even put on the streets, cars are getting accustomed to the new ways around town and how to be protective of cyclists. So I think that's part of it. I think, starting young too, if you can find a way of getting families to travel alternatively, then it becomes a part of the norm. There's no reason for us we're in the 21st century. This stuff should be kind of like a no-brainer at this point. It's beneficial for your health, for the environment, and I think even for a social experience, it makes spaces safer. So with that in mind, if we can encourage children to think of this as normal, then we're going to create adults who will have their own families, who will do this kind of activity regularly, and who will demand that out of their own towns and out of their own experiences. And then we've got millennials. I could talk about this forever, sorry. But millennials are changing it as well. They're demanding more out of their life experience. They want to be able to have time to socialize, and they aren't necessarily investing in cars like previous generations have. They're investing in the next and best cell phone, the next and best laptop, the next and best whatever technology, and they're enjoying that on subways and on buses.
More so than trying to buy a car and the hassle that comes along
Yes.
with that, right?
Yeah.
How about looking forward? I mean, the future of transportation. I mean, are you optimistic? What things do you see are opportunities? Where do you see a role for companies like Google to kind of really, think about future transportation?
You're doing a fantastic job right now. Like I said, we're exporting a lifestyle, and Google is a part of a messaging that infiltrates everything, every part of the globe. And I saw that personally when I was in Mongolia. I'm not trying to do an advertisement for Mongolia, but what I am trying to say is that even in the most remote or seemingly untouched landscapes, the messages that we create here are reverberating. So when we say in some of our models, hey, this is a cool way to live, then people want to emulate that. And it's really difficult to say this is a cool way to live if our storytellers are only experiencing car culture. Now, if, as you guys are building programs and apps and websites and new technology, if you're saying, hey, car culture, biking is a really cool way to live, you might influence people's choices next. And I think that that's a part of our future. Did I make sense?
That's awesome,
yeah. Okay.
Do you see, so that, and I see you're starting to talk about a role for Google. I mean, what can we do, either the Google's transportation team or Google in general? What are some opportunities you see for us to be able to partner with some of the messages that you're getting out there?
I think use it. If you guys can, if I can convince one of you guys, or you're probably all cyclists here anyway, but if I can convince someone who's not to try it, and it affects you positively, and you share your story with other people, it's going to translate into more people doing it. So I think by Googlers using the infrastructure that you already have, you're increasing the demand for that infrastructure, and you're going to be a model, a company model that we can export to other parts of the planet. And then you're also going to build statistics, and people need statistics, and those statistics should be free because they make our world better, and there's no reason for us to monetize those statistics. We can monetize other things, because I know everyone always thinks about how to monetize stuff. So.
The behavior change is something that we're always looking for new angles. We've been able to do pretty well here at Google,
Yeah.
but we always think we could do more. And so as we learn about how to translate the behavior change along with the infrastructure advocacy, along with the apps and technology,
Right.
It needs to be a multifaceted
But what
approach.
motivates people, really, in the end? It's finances, and a lot of governments work just on increasing taxes on this and so on. But it's also a social experience. If
Yeah.
people believe that, oh, this is going to be fun, this will be a really wonderful thing to be a part of, then they'll try it for a day. We have events that are like midnight rides, and that encourages people to just troll around Los Angeles at midnight with music blaring, and it's this pack of cyclists. And it's fun, and it starts introducing people to the concept of being able to get around town outside of the bubble of their cars. So you can create those social experiences as well. And then sometimes it just comes down to grabbing a friend who might not be a cyclist or might not be a walker, and saying, just walk with me to work. Let's just walk together. and introducing them to how easy it is. And just introducing them to the tap card, introducing them to the stops and so on, you know? Sometimes it's a little bit of hand-holding.
Yeah, good. First live question?
Hi, big fan of Kate Beckett.
Thank you. What's your name?
Ravi.
Ravish?
Ravi.
Ravi.
Yeah.
Rude.
So you mentioned urbanization and city planning. One of the things that has been happening, especially in developing countries, is as cities grow frantically, most of the planning goes into building roads, and houses tend to cluster together, places where people stay, and offices are usually far away. So cycling and walking, they're out of the reach for those kind of transportation modes. So what do you think can be done for future cities, right at the level of city planning, to make sure it's really planned according to keeping the environment and transportation of these forms in mind?
Well, of course, we've got subways and bus systems that'll be helpful. I think it's a matter of educating the leadership in those countries. In the case of back to Mongolia, sorry. But in the case of Mongolia, a lot of their leadership were recently nomads. And so the concept of public transit and of protecting that future for the people was kind of remote for people who were used to traveling by horseback for miles and miles. So I think it requires education, and it's just a demand factor as well by your local populace. You have to demand that infrastructure. This is the thing too. If we're doing it here, they're going to want to do it everywhere else. So countries that are in development, countries that are transitioning from, let's say, communism into capitalism, we're the model sometimes. And this organization and this company is a brilliant model. Everybody wants to be this, you know? So we're exporting that, and I think that's a part of the process as well. What do you think?
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Salim.
Hi.
So you're in the movie industry, but as you mentioned earlier, cars are romanticized in the movies, and yes, it's you're kind of exporting culture from the movies and the TV shows internationally, and you know, we don't see European movies, you know, where they're using the subway.
Yeah.
So that's not being exported here. Like we've got, you know, BART, where it doesn't really stop anywhere.
Yeah.
Over here, right? And it's hard to retrofit. Like where our offices in São Paulo, they just have bus service, even though they have a subway. You know, it's difficult to put that in. So just in movies, are you trying to change scripts to get them to have you use the subway when you in a scene, or ride on a bike? I've seen your show, but I haven't seen you on a bicycle.
No, not yet. But it is something that becomes a part of the conversation. I've joined one of the media groups that's responsible for environmental messaging. And so these are part of people's thought process. Oh, one thing I want to say, if you could get someone like Tom Cruise to ride the subway in India, you know, everybody, I think, would want to value that and would make it an investment, right? So if you can get people that are in the public eye and beloved, that's a way also of focusing people on that resource. That being said, I do have sometimes a limited amount of influence, and sometimes I'm able to encourage them to tell a story that will shift us away from a car-centric culture. And I try. And I think that we're having more and more success as we move forward. But the biggest difficulty is that if the writers aren't riding subways and aren't riding buses, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. This is all secondary. Transit is really secondary. They just write it in a car because it's subconscious in a way. We're inspired by our surroundings. We're inspired by our relationships with people. And if we build the infrastructure, that will affect the change in storytelling. Now, we're conscious of it here. So when you guys are building your stories that you're going to export internationally, maybe tomorrow you can change the story. Instead of being in a car, the guy was on a bicycle and he met her on a bicycle, you know? It could be a part of a conscious decision. I feel like I kind of like circled around and...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Stana. My name is Sakura, and lately there's been a lot of pieces and articles on NPR and elsewhere about infrastructure, especially in the U.S., and how our infrastructure does not match up with even developing world's infrastructure. There was a piece on the Daily Show comparing ours with South Africa's infrastructure, highways, et cetera. And I was wondering, there was also a piece on NPR about how that part of the freeway hasn't been built, and it's been in debate for about 50 years in LA. And so I was wondering, from just like an infrastructure perspective, your experiences in Mongolia and elsewhere compared to what you've seen being developed or not happening in LA on the infrastructure side for just like highways or public transportation, like how have you seen LA evolve? Or maybe devolve based on your kind of experience?
I found it really interesting when I first moved to LA. I found it a little difficult because I was living in Chicago, I was living in Toronto, I had traveled to Europe, and the concept of having a center where everyone goes to party was normal. And the concept of getting on a subway and heading somewhere was normal in major cities across the rest of the US and the globe. But that didn't feel like it was the case in Los Angeles. And because I was in a car so much of the time when I first arrived in Los Angeles felt really unconquerable. Not in the way that, oh, you're beating something down, in the way that you feel home, you know? I didn't feel like I had access to other people that were living in the city, and I didn't feel like I had access to the heartbeat or the rhythm of the city because I was stuck in the bubble of my car. And I said, oh, you know what, one day, if I have a voice that's large enough, that can reach enough people, I'd like to try to change it, because I believe that this is a media capital, and I think it'll affect everything else out there. And LA's had horrible experiences with smog and has worked really hard to shift that. And it didn't make sense to me either, because I said, this is California. We're supposed to be environmentally progressive. That's what everyone else says, right? And a huge amount of the US GDP circulates through this state, possibly still more so than any other state. So shouldn't this be like a no-brainer? Anyway, over the years, that's changed. LA has started investing, and it likely was the whole time. I just wasn't as aware of it as I am now, because I have actively sought it out, and because I think that their voice, Metro's voice, LADOT's voice, is getting louder. Because millennials don't want to sit in a car for 3 hours in a day to get somewhere, to get to work and get home. They want to just be able to pop on the subway, listen to music, read a book, and like chat with friends, right? So I think that there's a youth culture in Los Angeles, there's a creative force in Los Angeles that's demanding more out of their life and is asking the city to develop more. I think that people are becoming more environmentally conscious. I think that there's a shift in attitudes and behavior. I mean, there are a ton of electric cars that are forcing people in a way, or making people question how do we get around from place to place in a way that we haven't had to years before. I'm going on, I know. Anyway, I think there's an improvement happening in Los Angeles. Yes?
To follow that up, I just watched a video on YouTube about how Heineken is sponsoring some type of musical turnstiles, which a guy had an idea about that, and to build that into the New York subway system. And so I was wondering if you are aware of any such things happening in LA's transportation system to not, just improve the basic infrastructure, but to make the commute more fun. For me, that means, even though I ride my car, that means just plugging in my music in the car so that the commute, if I'm stuck in traffic, passes by faster. The Google shuttles are very helpful in that we have Wi-Fi on there, and so that we can do work. But I was wondering for public transit, how do we make it more fun so that we can inspire more people? And if, you know.
Well, I think you're right. I think, we can have events on the subway system. We could have a party train. Why not? There could be a music system that's playing on a train once in a while, and it wouldn't distract other commuters. I think that would be a really great way of encouraging people to come and seeing their transit in a different light. Also, the way that we decorate, it sounds kind of frou-frou, but the way that we decorate our stops can be quite inspiring. Los Angeles is doing a great job of coordinating with local artists and making the stops special, and each of them tell a different story. And then there is development that is encouraging businesses on each space. So bringing in great restaurants, great cafes, so that you can have a social experience at a stop is really important, I think, for people. And it changes the face and the way that you see travel. Travel can be fun. I've seen other companies do it. I've seen Virgin make travel fun. I love watching that video in all versions of it, and we can do that to public transit. And maybe it requires partnering up with a really great private organization. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll take another live question.
Hey, Stana. My name's Nick.
Hi.
So Google's obviously willing to invest.
You look like an actor.
Is that an invitation for a cameo on
No,
Castle?
go ahead.
So Google's obviously willing to invest a ton of money in like moonshot ideas, like stuff that sounds crazy or is super risky, but also really ambitious. And an example is the self-driving car. And I work next to these guys, and it's really amazing what they're doing, making cars safer so more people will hopefully be willing to bike someday. But if you were the CEO of Google, is there a kind of wild mode of transportation you would have us invent to help ATP's cause?
You mean other than my jetpack?
Hey, that's good.
Okay, we'll
We
start
like
with the jetpack. I'd like to partner with someone on this app. I really think that by giving governments the statistics they need, they can change the infrastructure, and we can create safe spaces across the globe. I'd love to see a great bike lane along the coast from San Francisco down to LA. Those are just a couple.
Awesome. Well, hopefully the right person's listening. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Stana. My name is Mani.
Hi.
My question is more around, there are a lot of initiatives here right now about making people use bikes and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's mostly like, one day of the year, like
Yeah.
bike to work and things like that.
Yeah.
But how do you make these people, use these bikes or other means of transportation more regularly? Because we bike one day and then we forget again. It's only 1 year rotation.
Yeah.
So how do you make it more like a habit so that, people do this more often?
Well, I think you start there. You start with 1 day a year. Another stat. If everyone went bike free, if everyone went car free for just 1 day, we'd be saving 11 billion trees. So just starting there is effective. We have a great organization called Ciclavia. One of our board member actually is a part of Ciclavia, and they started with just a few events, and slowly it's grown. And so let's start there. Let's just encourage people to go biking 1 day in a year, and then let's do it a couple more times. Let's set up a couple of events. Let's grab friends together and say, hey, let's just bike together. There are different challenges you can create, but if you start with the 1 day, that's a step in the right direction. What are your thoughts?
I think this should be more of a social experience. That's where people, other companies or other initiatives try to increase more people habitat or make it a habit. Is making it more of a social experience.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of don't see that a lot happening. You talked about a lot of things like partying, things like that. But I think it has to be more of a social experience.
So you're thinking of making it more of a social experience here at Google, maybe getting a midnight ride as sort of experience here at Google. That could be fun.
Everything is open.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
We'll be able to take a couple more. Go ahead.
Hi, Stana. I'm Russell.
Hi, Russell.
I don't really have a really focused question, but one area that
It's okay.
has
I've
occurred
been
to me
unfocused the
Okay.
entire time. What do you need?
is when people choose to drive, it's mostly because it's convenient. And one of the most important factors is time, right? So as cities get more crowded, it takes longer and longer to drive.
Yeah.
And for me, I actually bike, and I can actually bike as fast as I can drive with a lot more reliability, too. There's no traffic to worry about. Have you looked into stats where you might find that walking or driving or taking the bus is actually faster than driving, because that's what people care about at some level.
Well, yeah. What we do is we say, oh, how long does it take me to get from here to work? And it's different for everyone, of course. And sometimes it's faster if you go by bike. Sometimes it's faster if you go by car. But then let's look at the other things as well. I want to be fit. I want to look handsome for my partner or for my future spouse or whatever. So I know I'm going to be spending an hour every day at the gym. Well, that adds extra time, but you can kill two birds with one stone if you just ride your bike to work, right? So I think that there's a lot of stuff to take in consideration in order to motivate a person. And I think that's what you're asking is, how do we motivate people to take an alternative mode of transit? And if it comes down to time and just time, then things like that, you can collaborate efforts. You can say, hey man, you don't have to work out today because you just rode your bike to work, you know?
And you don't have to spend time parking. I mean, people ignore.
That's extra time as well. I'm sure that like there's a billion ideas about how this would save people time in the end. I know I have friends in Los Angeles who have made the choice to cycle only to work, and they found that after a while they were able to get to work in 45 minutes. For instance, I have a colleague who gets to work on his bike in 45 minutes, and he's timed it out regularly, and he said, it takes me an hour and 4 minutes to drive. So, you know, you got to also test it out sometimes. Thanks, Russell.
We'll take the last two, and then we'll wrap up.
Thanks for stopping by. I had a question about NIMBYism, both in like the community level and just like in the sense of planning. Like to get to the LA airport, you can theoretically take the new subway line they're building up until a certain point. SFO, you have to change trains several times. Communities are just like voting out of public transportation, like even the BART expansion in the Bay Area. Like what can we do to get everyone on board for the greater good instead of these little like fiefdoms that just vote themselves out?
You have to talk to people, you know, you have to engage with them, you have to bring real statistics. I sit down with people all the time who have, who don't have the complete picture about how it could benefit them. So it's a matter of educating people and being patient and continuing to advocate in spite of those steps backward. I don't know, what do you think? You've got experience, it seems.
I guess regional planning is probably the best way to go about it, like some sort of a regional transportation authority with like real power to zone and implement, I guess, at least in the Bay Area. That's my opinion.
Okay.
So to wrap up, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. There's lots of themes here. There's the infrastructure improvements, there's behavior change, there's advocacy, and then there's this use of technology, and then most importantly is the communications and use of the media. So thanks for sharing all that. We hope we can continue to work together. And
thank you.
Thank you all. Please join me in thanking Stana for her time.